This didn't happen to me directly, but it did happen to my cousin who served in the army and did a few tours overseas. Forgive me if I get some of the details wrong because we had a few drinks when he told me this story. He wouldn't tell me exactly where this happened, but I'm pretty sure it was somewhere in South America. I know he was down there a bunch. My cousin and I kind of lost touch over the last few years. He lives somewhere over in the Philippines now, and I think he does some type of internet marketing. Anyways, so my cousin tells me that one time when he was on a mission, and they killed this creature that was causing all kinds of issues. Apparently, it killed one of his fellow soldiers in the process. It literally shredded him to pieces. He never talks about this stuff unless he has quite a few drinks. So this one night we were hanging out and he starts telling me this story. He and 7 others get sent to some unknown location that he can't tell me, but he says it's heavily forested. They are to be there for 2 nights and will be airlifted out of there because they parachuted in. They set up camp as soon as they dropped in, and right away something felt really off, he said. Felt like he and the team were being watched, but they couldn't quite make out what it was. They kept hearing something circling them, but could find anything. The first night they were there, they would hear something throughout the night. They would sleep in shifts. When morning came, they started heading out to complete their mission, and that's when all hell broke loose. As soon as they left camp, this thing came out of nowhere and attacked one of his soldiers. It tackled him into the thick brush and was literally tearing him apart. My cousin and the others tried shooting at it, but it was too quick. It would just dodge every bullet. They went to give the fallen soldier medical attention, but it was too late. He was already dead. There wasn't much left of him either. They knew they had to find this thing and take it down before it killed again. They tracked it down to a small cave, and when they went in there, it was like nothing they had ever seen before. This thing was reptilian, like half man and half reptile. It was huge and had razor-sharp claws. It hissed at them, and they knew they were in trouble. They opened fire on it right there in the cave and hit it, causing it to flail all around, and it was twitching and smacking itself against the side of the cave. My cousin said it looked like it was trying to get away from something. Eventually, they killed it. He said it was the craziest thing he had ever seen in his life, and still gives him nightmares to this day. They finished out the mission, but when they were done, they took this thing back with them when they got airlifted out of there. He said that they sent it off for testing. He never knew what happened to it after that and was never able to get any answers. They told me that there are things out there that people don't want to know about and left it at that. So strange, don't you think? I've had an encounter that really has me puzzled, to say the least. Then, when leaving, I ran into another person that saw something even stranger. What's going on in these woods? The first encounter happened to me. I was hiking near a national park. It was a Sunday morning, and the day looked like it was going to be beautiful. I'm about 20 minutes into my hike, something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. It was an unusual creature with short legs that I had never seen before. It was standing about 40 feet into the woods. At first, I thought it might be a bear or some other animal, but as I got closer, I noticed that this creature had bright reddish-brown fur, long arms, and a humanoid face complete with 2 eyes. It wasn't until later that I realized this might have been what some folks call Sasquatch. But I don't understand why it was so low to the ground. I'm not sure. I was scared, but also intrigued. I wanted to find out more about it. As I approached, it turned and quickly ran away into the woods. I followed it for a few minutes, hoping to catch up with it, but eventually lost sight of it as it disappeared into the trees. I don't know why I followed it. I just had this feeling like it wasn't dangerous. I don't know what exactly this creature was, but it looked kind of like a Sasquatch. All I can say is that whatever it was, its presence left me feeling a bit unnerved and curious at the same time. That same day, I ran into a local fisherman. He told me that he lived near Lake Superior in Wisconsin and was out fishing as usual when he stumbled upon a very large animal that didn't look like anything I had ever seen before. It was walking on land, and it had large teeth protruding from its mouth. It seemed to be hunting for something in the water. I quickly reeled my line in and made sure not to get too close. As he watched this creature from afar, he began to realize that it must have been an ancient creature from millions of years ago. Suddenly, the creature disappeared into the lake, never to be seen again. He proceeded to tell me that this thing in the water was probably about 8 feet long, had this bluish-gray, scaly skin, almost like a cross between a lizard and a fish, an almost human-like face and these massive teeth. I've seen fish before on Animal Planet that have a human-like face, and that is kind of what it looked like. What were these creatures? So strange? Anyways, he said, that he's been back to the same fishing spot several times since but never saw it again. I wish these encounters could be explained. What were they, and how many more stories do people from this area have? This is a hand-me-down story from my grandfather, Tim. While I was just a kid when this happened and don't remember it in full detail myself, I will never forget the Thanksgiving we all went to Grandpa Tim's for dinner and found him rattled, clothes torn, sitting on the porch and the turkey not even cooking yet at noon. Grandpa Tim lived right outside of Saginaw, Michigan, where stories of the Dog Man circulate regularly, but as kids we all just called it the Michigan Werewolf. Nobody that I knew at the time really believed in the thing. It was just a little bit of folklore and superstition that the grown-ups would talk about to scare us kids when the opportunity to do so came up. Of course, every grown-up had a tale of a time they'd seen it, but it all sounded like a lot of bologna to me. Thanksgiving 1989, though, Grandpa convinced us all for good that the thing really was real. I remember Dad pulling down the long driveway and Grandpa sitting there in the cold with his shirt ripped open, puffing away on a cigar on the front steps of his house. He had his gun leaned up against the railing beside him and looked like he was on alert, watching for something to come up on us. My mom asked my dad what was wrong with him, and Dad said he didn't know just as we all started getting out of the car. Grandpa looked at us, wild-eyed and rattled, and said, "Get those kids in the house and kids don't come outside the rest of the day." He was really firm about it, and so Mom rushed us all indoors and we sat down. It wasn't long before Mom realized Grandpa hadn't even started the turkey, so she ran in and put it on as quickly as she could. Soon, my aunts and uncles and cousins all showed up too. Once everyone was in the house, Grandpa came in and locked the door behind him and proceeded to go around the house closing all the blinds and curtains. Finally, my dad asked what the hell was going on. Grandpa sat us all down and told something had been stalking around killing Grandpa's sheep over the last week or so at night, so he'd set a couple traps thinking it might be a coyote or a timber wolf. He woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of pained howling in the yard and knew one of the traps had worked, so he grabbed his gun and ran outside, and that's when he saw the Dog Man. He said it stood at least 7 foot tall, upright like a man, covered in hair with the face and head of a large wolf. Its eyes glowed yellow through the dark at him as he came out the back door, and it had the trap in one of its hands, having already removed it from itself. It was furious and came after my grandpa, clawing and grabbing at him. Grandpa had climbed up on top of the house and hit it a few times with the butt of his gun before he finally managed to get a few good shots off. He said he shot the thing at least 3 times in the shoulders and chest, but it didn't seem terribly fazed by the bullets. Eventually, it exhausted itself and took off back into the woods, leaving Grandpa rattled and shaky, sitting on the porch waiting for it to come back. He'd sat outside until everyone that was coming was safe in the house. It was a late Thanksgiving dinner that year, and an odd one with us all piled inside. The adults kept asking Grandpa questions like they really didn't believe him, but I know my grandfather would have never lied about such a thing. Later that year, my parents convinced Grandpa Tim to move to town and live closer to us, so the Dog Man was never an issue that impeded on family get-togethers again. It's out there, though. I saw the claw marks on my grandpa and the fear in his eyes when we pulled up that day. I don't know if I'll ever be able to truly get over the experience I've had, but I may as well share it to try and get some relief. Earlier this year, honestly towards the beginning, I saw some unexplainable stuff. More specifically, an unexplainable entity. I say entity because truthfully I don't know if there is any other way to describe what it was. It was so out there. But I'll start at the beginning. During the winter months, my family and I stay at our lodge up in Nebraska with my grandparents. It's kind of peaceful there most years, and I was having a nice time during the first few days. It was a week where there wasn't a ridiculous amount of snow, the weather was kind of letting up, a generally positive atmosphere. Then one night, out of absolutely nowhere, I experienced one of the most terrifying moments of my life. My room in the lodge is at the top, in the attic. See, I've always loved having that room because there's this massive bay window that opens up, and when you climb out of it, you can actually sit on the roof, look at the stars. I did this all the time, so being on the roof was never intimidating for me or anything like that. So, on this night, I'm doing my normal nightly routine of getting ready for bed, sneaking a beer and sitting up on the roof for a little while. Everything is fine at first until I hear this crazy loud buzzing. Buzzing as in bugs. But during the winter there at least, there are hardly ever any bugs around. It's too cold, they don't want to be outside. I'm sitting there then, wondering where this sound could possibly be coming from. It's so intense that it sounds like it could be a swarm of some kind. I'm not someone who is particularly afraid of bugs, but with buzzing like that, anyone would be a bit creeped out. The rough bit was when I realized that the intensity of the buzzing was not a swarm, was not coming from a large group of bugs, but rather one large bug monster thing. Our cabin is in a complex of similar ones, all set up in a row. Each is built in a similar style, and so each has a roof. I heard a large slam sound on the roof next to mine. Slowly I turned, and I am still coming to terms with what I saw. Standing there on the roof next to mine was the source of the buzzing. It stood at probably 5 feet tall, the height of a middle schooler, but that didn't make it seem less intimidating. It looked human in its shape, its limbs, but those limbs were covered in what looked like feathers, fur, some kind of black material that was certainly not skin. It kept looking at me the whole time, making this noise, examining me. I was freaked. I wanted to scream, but I was also a bit frozen trying to process what it was that I was looking at. It had a face that was indescribable, almost as though it had no face at all. But what it did have were eyes. I see its eyes now, every time I'm scared, every time I have a nightmare. They were red, massive, and beady. They were also reflective. You could tell since the moon was kind of bouncing off of them. I wasn't quite sure what to do, how to react. So instead, I simply kept watching in hopes that it would eventually get bored and go away. But it didn't, was the thing. I don't know how long we sat out there, but I can tell you that I nearly froze to death with how cold it was getting. I didn't want to move, though. I couldn't, so for at least an hour we had our staring match. Then, like a miracle, it finally decided it was done looking at me. I had seen its wings laying against its body, nearly touching its feet with their length the whole time. I had wondered what they would look like outstretched or in flight, as scary as it was. I found that out when its wings became outstretched. The wingspan something absolutely sickening, certainly more than the length of the creature's body. It was odd, though, because unlike the rest of its features, the wings on it didn't look traditional insect-like. Instead, its wings were some impressive leather materials, certainly looking strong and not easily breakable. I wondered what the hell it was doing there, where it came from. But truthfully, I hope I never know. I watched it take flight, still making the sickening noise that makes me jump anytime there's so much as a butterfly around me. It flapped around in a circle a few times, and I didn't know if it was trying to tell me something or if it was simply trying to show off. When it was out of my field of vision, only then did I start climbing back inside. My hands and feet were totally numb, and I had a cold the following week from being out there for so long. For the rest of the night, I just stood there on the inside of the bay window, looking out, simultaneously trying to catch another glimpse and hoping I never saw it again. All at once, I was disgusted, elated, curious, and confused. I never did end up seeing it again. I also have never sat up there again on the roof. I'm afraid that if I do, I'll call it back somehow. I don't know what it was, not really, so maybe you will. If nothing else, it certainly is one heck of a story.